The alien general wanted to test her human mate. She wasn't ready for the outcome. The door to the war room slammed open and nobody moved. That was the rule aboard the warship Kethara. When General Vorath entered, you held still. You breathed small. You did not draw attention to yourself unless you wanted to spend the next rotation scrubbing reactor vents with a bristle the width of your thumb. Nobody moved, except Lieutenant Kate Calloway. She was already standing at the central hollow table, her fingers tracing lines through a three-dimensional star map, her brow furrowed in the particular way it furrowed when she thought nobody was watching. Her coffee, real coffee, the kind she'd traded 2 weeks of ration credits to acquire, sat steaming beside her left elbow. She didn't look up. "The gravitational drift on the eastern corridor is wrong," she said. "Whoever calculated this burn window used a model that doesn't account for the binary pull from the secondary star. If we run this route, we lose the third transport ship inside the first hour." Silence, the kind that had weight. Vorath crossed the room in 6 strides. She was tall even by Kethari standards, with the broad gray shoulders of a soldier who had spent 40 years winning wars that lesser commanders had already conceded. Her rank markings ran from collarbone to jaw in deep ceremonial violet. Her eyes were the pale amber of something that did not flinch. She stopped directly across the holotable from Kate. Kate still didn't look up. "Lieutenant Calloway," said Commander Dresch from somewhere near the door, his voice carrying the specific frequency of a man who did not want to be associated with what was about to happen. "1 second, Kate said. She moved 3 coordinates, ran the simulation. The third transport ship survived. She nodded once, picked up her coffee, and finally looked up. Vorath was watching her with an expression Kate had not yet learned to read. "You are correct," the general said. "I know," Kate said. Another silence, longer this time. Dresch made a sound near the door that was not quite a word. The Kethari Alliance and the Earth Colonial Fleet had been formally allied for 16 months. In that time, 3 human officers had been assigned to Vorath's ship as part of the Joint Command Integration Program. The first 2 had requested reassignment within a month. They had not explained why, but the explanation was not complicated. Vorath tested everything. She tested the hull seals and the food supply and the loyalty of her junior officers and the load tolerance of every bulkhead on the ship. She tested them the way other commanders breathed, constantly, without announcement, as a basic condition of existence. Kate Calloway had been on board for 11 weeks. She had not requested reassignment. She had also, in 11 weeks, corrected 4 navigational errors, redesigned the triage protocol for the medical bay, talked a Kethari pilot through a landing approach in a debris field during a comm blackout using nothing but hand signals through a viewport, and once, memorably, beaten Dresch at a strategic simulation so completely that he had sat in front of the board for 4 full minutes, not speaking. Vorath had been watching all of it. Kate did not know she was being watched. She thought she was just doing her job. This was, as far as Vorath was concerned, the most interesting thing about her. The briefing proceeded. Vorath laid out the operation, a supply corridor that 3 separate coalition ships had failed to secure in the past 6 weeks. The enemy had adaptive positioning. Every time a fleet moved to lock down the corridor, the opposition had shifted before the fleet arrived. Someone was predicting their movements. The question was how. Kate listened. She asked 2 questions, both precise. She did not offer opinions that weren't requested. When the briefing ended and the other officers filtered out, Vorath said, without turning from the holotable, "Stay." Dresch looked at Kate with the expression of a man watching someone step onto ice he wasn't sure would hold. Kate stayed. Vorath waited until the room was empty. Then she turned. "You have not requested reassignment?" "No," Kate said. "The 2 officers before you did." "I heard. Why haven't you?" Kate considered this the way she considered most things, directly, without theater. "Because the work is interesting, Austin, and because the fact that you test things doesn't bother me. My grandmother tested things. She was a structural engineer. She said, if you don't test it, you don't know it. And if you don't know it, it fails on you when it matters." Vorath looked at her for a long moment. "Your grandmother," she said. "She built 3 bridges. They're all still standing." Something moved in Vorath's expression. Kate didn't catch it in time to name it. "The enemy is predicting our movements," Vorath said. "I believe there is a pattern we are not seeing. I want you to find it." Kate set down her coffee. "What resources do I have?" "Whatever you need." "Timeline?" "We move in 4 days." Kate nodded. She pulled the holotable back up and started from the beginning. Vorath watched her for a moment. Then she left. Dresch found Kate 6 hours later, still at the table, surrounded by simulations and an alarming quantity of empty cups. "She gave you the leak problem," he said. "Yes. 3 intelligence officers before you couldn't solve it." "I know. Does that concern you?" Kate looked up. "She's testing me." "Yes." "Good," Kate said, and looked back at the table. "I like knowing what's happening." Dresch stood there for a moment. "You know she is not simply your commanding officer." Kate's hand stilled on the table. The Cathari bonding designation had been filed 6 weeks ago. It was, by Earth diplomatic standards, the rough equivalent of a formal partnership declaration. By Cathari standards, it was considerably more permanent and considerably more serious and involved. Among other things, a responsibility on the part of the senior partner to assess the capabilities of the junior partner before the designation was considered final. Testing, in other words. Vorath was testing her mate. Kate had been informed of the designation in a very brief, her very formal communication from the Diplomatic Liaison Office that had contained 3 paragraphs of context and 1 sentence from Vorath herself, which read, "Your acceptance is not assumed. Your answer is your own." Kate had not yet given an answer. She looked back at the star map. The pattern was there. She could feel it the way she felt structural problems. A wrongness in the spacing, a rhythm that was almost right, but not quite. "I know what she is," Kate said. She found the first thread of the pattern 40 minutes later. It was going to be a very long 4 days. The pattern was elegant. That was the word Kate kept coming back to as she peeled it apart, layer by layer, across 36 hours of barely interrupted work. It was elegant the way a trap was elegant, built by someone who understood exactly how a fleet commander thought, who knew that the first instinct was always to secure the nearest viable choke point, who had designed a system that fed that instinct exactly what it wanted and then punished it for wanting. She'd eaten twice, slept once, 4 hours on the cot in the corner of the war room that Dresch had dragged in around hour 18 with the expression of a man who had accepted that she was not leaving. She'd gone through every movement report from the last 6 weeks. She'd mapped the opposition's repositioning against every standard fleet doctrine in the coalition database and found the place where the responses were too fast. Faster than reaction, faster than intelligence, faster than anything except prediction. They weren't predicting the fleet's movements. They were predicting the fleet's thinking. Someone had mapped the decision trees, not the tactical decisions, the strategic ones, and the assumptions commanders made before they made choices. the invisible logic that sat underneath every deployment order like a foundation. The opposition had that map. They had built a model of how coalition commanders thought, and they were running ahead of it. Kate sat back. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She drank it anyway. The question was how they'd built the model. She went back further. Not fleet movements. Personnel files. Which commanders had been assigned where? Over what period? Under which strategic frameworks? The coalition had 3 dominant schools of doctrine, all developed in the same 40-year window, mostly by the same generation of war college graduates who had trained under the same 3 founding theorists. There it was. The opposition hadn't hacked the fleet's communications. They'd read the fleet's textbooks. Kate stood up. Her back made a sound she chose to ignore. She had 2.5 days left and a presentation to build. Martin, and she needed Vorath. She found the general in the training bay. This was not where Kate had expected to find her. Vorath was alone, running a sparring sequence against a combat simulation frame, the kind of automated opponent that could be set to any difficulty level. Kate stood in the doorway for a moment and watched. The general moved in the particular way of someone who had been fighting so long that the body no longer waited for the mind. It was efficient and total, and Kate noticed with a part of her brain she hadn't cleared for duty on this matter, completely absorbing to watch. She walked in anyway. "I found it," she said. Vorath stopped the sequence. Turned. She was breathing hard, which Kate had never seen before. "Show me," Vorath said. They walked back to the war room together. Kate laid it out systematically, the decision tree model, the doctrinal overlap, the publication trail that had given the opposition everything they needed without a single security breach. Vorath listened without interrupting, which Kate had also never experienced before. When Kate finished, Vorath stood looking at the map for a long time. "If you are right," she said, "this compromises every operation planned under current doctrine." "Yes. And the correction requires a complete departure from standard deployment logic on this run." "Yes, and they won't have a model for what we do if we do something none of the doctrine covers." Vorath looked at her. "And what does none of the doctrine cover?" Kate had been thinking about this since hour 30. "Something that looks like a mistake," she said. "Something that a coalition commander would never do on purpose. We give them the pattern they expect on the Eastern approach, just enough to confirm their model is working. And we use the Western corridor simultaneously, none with the transports running the profile of a supply retrieval rather than a military convoy. The Western corridor is in contested space." "I know. That's why they won't be watching it." A pause. "This is your recommendation," Vorath said. "Yes. The risk is not small." "No. But the risk of running east is certain failure. The risk of running west is possible success. I know which one I'd rather stake my career on." Something happened in Vorath's expression that Kate was beginning, this slowly, to learn to read. It wasn't approval exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who had set a weight on a scale and found it heavier than they'd expected. "I will review the full proposal," Vorath said. "Prepare a comprehensive briefing for command staff at noon." "Understood." Kate was almost to the door when Vorath said, "Calloway." She stopped. "You have not slept enough." "I slept 4 hours. You need more than 4 hours." "I'll sleep after the briefing." She left without waiting for a response. Behind her, she heard nothing. No reprimand, no insistence. She slept for 6 hours, woke up, and delivered the most precise briefing of her career. The command staff approved the plan. Vorath said nothing during the vote. She had already cast hers. It was yes. The night before the operation, Dresch found Kate in the observation bay, sitting on the floor with her back against the viewport and the stars filling the glass above her. He sat down beside her without being invited. This was something she'd come to understand about him. He was the kind of person who understood that company and conversation were not the same thing. They sat in silence for a while. She approved your plan in front of the full command staff, Dresch said eventually. I know. She has never done that, not for any officer. She revises, she redirects, she never simply approves. Kate looked at the stars. Dresch, she said. Yes. What does the final test look like? For the designation? A pause. I'm not certain, he said. It's different for every pair. But the stories all have one thing in common. He thought about it. The general finds the thing the other person is most afraid of, and she stands on one side of it, and she waits to see if they cross. Kate absorbed this. Yaman, and if they don't cross? No record of that outcome, Dresch said. In the stories. Kate looked back at the stars. Her coffee had gone cold again. She drank it. What are you afraid of? Dresch asked. Kate thought about her grandmother's bridges, still standing. About the feeling of a structural problem before you could see it. The wrongness in the rhythm, the almost right that wasn't. About the difference between knowing a thing was solid and having to put weight on it to find out. Is being wrong about what's solid, she said. Dresch nodded slowly. Neither of them said anything else. The operation launched at dawn. The western corridor was exactly as dangerous as Kate had said it would be. It was also, in ways she had not fully anticipated, beautiful. The contested zone sat between two dying stars, and the debris they had shed over 10,000 years had crystallized in the gravitational field between them into something that navigation charts labeled as a hazard zone. And poets, had any been present, would have called a cathedral. Great, slow-turning walls of ice and mineral caught the light of both dying suns and threw it back in colors that had no business existing in a war corridor. Kate stood at the navigation console and did not look at it. She watched her screens. She ran her calculations. She kept the convoy running clean. The convoy was 12 ships, 3 military escorts, 9 transports carrying medical supplies, water recycling components, and 230 civilians evacuated from the outer settlement at Myra's post. The civilians were not on the original manifest. They had appeared 3 hours before launch, when the settlement's distress beacon had lit up, and Vorath had made a decision in approximately 4 seconds that had added significant complexity to an already complex operation. Kate had rerouted in real time. She was still rerouting. Hostile contact bearing 27 Mark IV, the tactical officer called out. One ship, a scout. It had seen them. Kate's hands were already moving. Flag formation, she said. If we tighten the convoy spacing and put the military escorts in a non-standard flanking position, the thermal signature reads as a single large vessel instead of a 12-ship convoy. They'll report an anomaly, not a convoy. That assumes the scout doesn't get a clean spectral read, Dresch said from the secondary console. The crystalline field degrades spectral reads at this range by 40%, Kate said. We're inside that range. If we stay inside it for the next 18 minutes, they can't confirm what we are. Dresch looked at the field, looked at Kate. We'd have to fly closer to the crystal walls than safety margins allow. Yes. The transport pilots haven't trained for this. I'll walk them through it. She was already on the comm. What followed was 18 minutes that Kate would think about for a long time afterward, not because they were the most dangerous 18 minutes of her life, though they were, by any reasonable measure, but because of what happened in the middle of them. Minute 4. The first transport clipped the edge of a crystal formation. Minor hull contact. No breach. The pilot, a young Cathari named Veth, who was 3 years out of flight academy, panicked and started to pull wide. Kate's voice on the comm was exactly the same as it had been 5 minutes earlier. Veth, I need you to correct 7 degrees to port, not more. The formation opens up 20 meters ahead on your current line. You're going to see it in 3 seconds, and you're going to trust it. 3 seconds. I see it, Veth said. Good. Through the gap. Steady. Minute 9. The scout sent a hailing frequency. Standard identification request. Vorath looked at Kate. Kate looked at the hailing signal, at the crystal field, at the scout's position relative to the field's interference radius. She ran a number in her head that she didn't have time to verify on screen. Don't answer, she said. Not answering a hail is an aggressive act, Vorath said. Answering it confirms we have a crew capable of receiving and responding to hail. Right now we look like a drifting anomaly. Answering makes us a ship. They'll scramble on a ship. They won't scramble on an anomaly they can't confirm. Vorath said nothing for 2 seconds. Do not answer, she told the communications officer, and the scout held position for 4 minutes. Then it moved on. Minute 14. The second transport's navigation system threw a fault. Full autopilot failure. Manual only. The pilot's name was Carol Ann. Kate found out 2 things about Carol Ann in rapid succession. Carol Ann was a good pilot, and Carol Ann had never flown manual through a crystal debris field at 18-minute emergency pace before. The comm traffic from Carol Ann's ship went from structured to unstructured inside 60 seconds. Kate switched to a direct channel. Carol Ann, she said, look at your center screen, not your side screens. The side screens are showing you everything that can go wrong. Your center screen shows you where you're going. Only go where you're going. A pause. Okay, Carol Ann said. Her voice was thin. You're a good pilot. I've seen your records. Keep the nose on the line I'm sending to your screen now. That's all you have to do. Kate sent the line. Carol Ann flew it. Minute 18. The convoy cleared the field. Kate let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, which meant it had been in there for approximately 18 minutes, which probably explained some things about her cardiovascular system's current state. Vorath was looking at her from across the bridge. Kate became aware, in the particular way that awareness sometimes arrived after the fact, that Vorath had not spoken once during those 18 minutes except to relay Kate's single instruction about the hail. The bridge had been running on Kate's voice, and Vorath had allowed it, had in fact stepped back and allowed it from minute 1. She hadn't known that until now. The convoy completed its run 4 hours later. The transports docked at the coalition station without incident. At Galt, the 230 civilians from Myra's post were processed and housed. The medical supplies were unloaded. The water recycling units were delivered. Nobody died. Kate stood at the viewport when it was done and looked at the station's lights and felt the specific exhaustion of someone whose body had just caught up to everything the last 4 days had asked of it. Vorath came to stand beside her. You step back on the bridge, Kate said. Yes. You didn't have to. No. Why did you? Vorath looked at the station lights. Because you knew what to do. And the only thing my presence in that chain would have added was delay. Kate thought about that. That's not a thing most commanders would say. Most commanders have not stood where I am standing, Vorath said. They were quiet for a moment. The station rotated slowly against the black. The test, Kate said. Yes. This was it. It was part of it, Vorath said. Named Kate looked at her. What's the rest? What Vorath said next, Kate was not prepared for. Not because it was complicated, not because it was dangerous, because it was the most direct thing anyone had ever said to her, and Kate Calloway had spent her entire life surrounded by people who communicated in the space between words, and had come to believe that the words themselves were mostly scaffolding. Vorath looked at her and said, "The rest is whether you stay." Kate stood very still. The test of the operation, Vorath said, was whether you could do what you do when the cost was real, when the people in those ships were not hypothetical. You passed that test before you found the leak pattern. You passed it when you rerouted for the civilians at Mira's post without being asked and without waiting to see if I would approve. Kate said nothing. The test of the mission was whether you could hold the line under pressure you had not planned for. You did. The test of the corridor was whether you could keep other people steady when you had no guarantee the floor would hold. Vorath paused. You did. Those were tests, Kate said. Everything is a test, Vorath said without apology. That is not cruelty. That is how I know what is real. Kate thought about her grandmother, about bridges, about the weight you put on something to find out if it holds. She had grown up understanding that the testing was not a threat. It was a form of care, that you tested the things that mattered. You didn't guess at them. And the rest, Kate said. Staying. That's not a test you can run. No, Vorath said. That is the one thing I cannot test. I can test capability. I can test judgment. I can test how a person behaves when the variables turn against them. I cannot test whether a person chooses to remain. That is the only variable I cannot control. She looked at Kate directly. It is also the only one that matters to me. Kate looked out at the station. Dresch's words came back to her. The general finds the thing the other person is most afraid of. She stands on one side of it. She waits. Kate knew what she was afraid of. Being wrong about what was solid. Putting weight on something and having it fail. Not because she'd miscalculated, but because the thing itself had not been what it appeared to be. She had run Vorath through every test she had, without meaning to. The general who moved through a room like a decision. The commander who stepped back on a bridge so her officer could work. The person who had written in 3 paragraphs of diplomatic language and 1 honest sentence. Your answer is your own. Kate turned to face her. I'm going to tell you something, Kate said. And I want you to understand it's not a performance. It's just what's true. Vorath waited. The first week I was on this ship, Kate said, I thought you were the most difficult working environment I had ever encountered. Everything was a test. Nothing was explained. The 2 officers who left before me, I understood why they left. It's not comfortable being tested constantly. It's not warm. She paused. But my grandmother used to say that comfort and safety are not the same thing. Comfortable things fail you quietly. Tested things fail you loudly, if they fail at all. And usually they don't, because you already know what they're made of. Vorath was very still. I know what you're made of, Kate said. I've been watching for 11 weeks. I know how you make decisions, and I know what you protect, and I know that you wrote me 1 honest sentence when you could have written nothing. she met Voreth's eyes. Pale amber, the color of something that had been through every kind of weather and was still standing. "I'm not leaving." The station rotated. The light moved. Anna Vorath reached out. She set 2 fingers against Kate's wrist, which Kate would later learn was the Cathari equivalent of something much larger. An acknowledgement. A beginning. A weight placed carefully on a surface to see if it holds. And finding that it does. "There is a formal process," Voreth said. "Diplomatic protocols, documentation." "I know," Kate said. Dresch explained approximately 47 times. He is thorough. He is anxious. The corner of Voreth's mouth moved. Kate had not seen that before either. "There is also," Voreth said, "a less formal process, which is simply this. I would like to show you what this designation means from my side. Not the documents, the actual thing." Kate thought about the cathedral corridor, the crystal walls and the 2 dying suns and the light they threw in colors she hadn't had time to look at while she was working. "I'd like that," she said. They stood at the viewport together for a while. The station turned, and the lights were ordinary and bright and completely sufficient. Kate thought, solid. She thought, yes. She thought, grandmother, you would have liked her. She tests everything. Somewhere down the corridor, Dresch was almost certainly standing outside the door trying to determine if it was appropriate to interrupt, reaching no conclusion and staying put. It was appropriate that he stay put. Kate and Voreth had things to figure out. Not the hard things. Those were done. The testing was over. The question had been asked and answered in the way the best answers always came. Not as a declaration, but as a fact that had been true for a while before anyone said it out loud. They had a formal process ahead of them. Documentation, protocols, 2 diplomatic offices, and 1 very enthusiastic liaison who had apparently been tracking the situation with great personal investment since week 3. They had all of that. But right now the station was turning and the light was good, and Kate Calloway, who had crossed the floor and put her weight on it and found it solid, was exactly where she had chosen to be. The stars outside didn't comment on any of this. They had seen longer stories and would see longer ones yet. This one, as far as they were concerned, was just getting started.